Don Mazzella here again for Small Business Digest. A week and a half ago, we had a focus group, and the discussion is about what happens when you have relatives in your company. Well, as it happened, right across my desk, David Bentall came along, and he has a book, and that's what he talks about is succession planning, having people in business. So we have him on the program. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Don. Looking forward to sharing with you. And family business is an interesting topic, so I'm looking forward to exploring it with you today.
Well, I have to tell you, I was raised in a family business myself, and I can tell you. But anyway, as we ask all our guests, first, Dave, tell us a little bit about yourself, then about your company and your newest book, and finally a website.
Awesome. Well, starting about talking about our company, it really goes back to the
No, I
family.
want to talk about you first, not the company. You
Okay.
first.
Well, thank you. So, Don, I'm a third generation member of our family, born and bred in the Vancouver area, lived most of my 67 years here in the city of Vancouver, took my education in real estate here, also took something called the Owner President's Program at Harvard. And then, Don, I worked essentially 20 years in our family companies, 10 years more or less on the real estate side, for those of you who are listening or part of real estate, 10 years in the construction side. And then as a result of a tragic falling out between my dad and my uncles, all of our businesses got sold. And so I've spent the last 25 years, Don, advising other families. People keep asking me, how can we avoid the mess your family fell into? So the university asked me to set up a Center for Family Business Studies. I've written 2 books about my experience. And frankly, Don, it's been my privilege to work with hundreds of families to help them think about how do we navigate the interplay between family and business. So that's what I do with my life.
Okay, and your latest book?
Yeah, my latest book, you asked me to bring it along. So the title of my latest book is Dear Younger Me. And Don, it came from deep reflection in my own life, because I will never forget, I was on an airplane flying back. I'd facilitated 2 different family meetings, one in one city and one in another. I'd prepared well for them. But as I'm sitting on the plane flying home, neither meeting had gone very well. And I was trying to figure out what on earth went wrong. And I thought, well, in the first meeting, one member of the family was just plain impatient, and his impatience was infecting the mood in the family. And I thought, what went wrong in the other meal? The other one, well, there was one kid wasn't prepared to forgive something his parents did when he was in high school. And I thought, okay, well, that was a problem. I'm sure glad I wasn't like that. No, I thought, or was I? And Dawn, it was that moment of epiphany where I realized I had been impatient. I had been unforgiving. And so I wrote Dear Younger Me, looking at all the ways that I had been an unhelpful participant, unwittingly, in our family circumstance. So I've written about the importance of patience and forgiveness, but also other things, the importance of empathy, the importance of listening, importance of humility. So really the book is about how can these powerful elements transform not just a person's life, but their relationships with others in the family and their interactions with others in the business. So that's what it's about, Don.
Okay, and you have a website for your company?
Yeah, my website, my business is called Next Step Advisors, NEXTSTEP Advisors, ADVISORS. And because I'm a Canadian, .ca, nextstepadvisors.ca. So you can get a hold of my book there. You can learn more about what I do as an advisor there.
Well, okay, we can go in a lot of directions. You wanted to say something, and then I want to talk about what happened in our focus group. So I'm going to let you, since you're the guest, you go first.
Great, Don. Well, a lot of people wonder, what is this emotional intelligence thing? And the idea of emotional intelligence was popularized by Dan Goleman back in 1995 in his book by the same title. And he talks about it. He said it's really about how we handle ourselves in relationships. And just going back to what I was just sharing a few moments ago, I've discovered that if, as individuals, we can invest in cultivating these traits that I was alluding to, whether they be patience or empathy or frankly gratitude, one I haven't mentioned before. If we can cultivate those kinds of traits, they can have a remarkable impact, transformative, frankly, impact in our relationships. And Dawn, I first started learning about this as I discovered in my wife and I've been married 44 years, but the first couple dozen years, we had a lot of challenges because I lacked emotional intelligence. So Dawn, I've become passionate about helping next gens begin to think about not just the balance sheets and the spreadsheets, but rather about the pursuit of their emotional intelligence. So that's what I've become passionate about these days, and helping next gens explore how they can make a difference, not just in their business lives, but also, frankly, their personal lives. I can't hear you, Don.
I want to go there. Had my mic off in deference to you,
Thank you.
but I want to go there. But then I really have an agenda because, like I say, we had a focus group and it almost ended up in a fight because you know when you hire your son or you hire your nephew, which is the worst one, you're opening your as someone said, "Oi, did I open myself to headaches?"
Yeah.
Okay. But what I want to talk about is solutions. You have a problem, a nephew. Your brother said, please put him in the business. You did. And boy, was that a mistake. How do you handle such a situation?
Well, Don, let's go back. First of all, I'm the nephew, right? I worked for our family company, and things fell apart between my dad and his brother, but they fell apart very badly between my uncle and myself. So let's start by how I think we'll talk about how to resolve a problem. Let's start by talking about how to avoid the problem. I think that the most important thing families can do together to avoid the kind of problem you're alluding to, the kind of problem that I created, was to have a family employment policy. The wisest families, what do you think of S.C. Johnson, who are famous as a family company? Think about the family companies that have lasted for many generations. The wisest ones don't have a family employment policy. And what does that include? It includes a lot of things, but the most important things that it includes is, how do you join the company? What are the conditions upon which a nephew could ever get hired? And the wisest families have rules that say you must work outside for a minimum of X number of years. And they also require a minimum of a certain level of education. One family I know started with saying, we want to have a 2 to 5 years work experience elsewhere. They've changed their policy, Don. If you want to work for this family, they're a chocolatier. They manufacture and distribute chocolates across Canada, Purdy's Chocolates. If you want to work there, if you're a member of the family, you can't even apply until you've had 10 years experience elsewhere and 2 promotions elsewhere. That avoids the nephew who doesn't know how to walk and chew gum. It avoids him getting a job. So that's the first thing. Families should have a family employment policy. And then the second thing is families need to be thinking about having supervision of nephews or everybody else by people who are other than their dad or their uncle or family, having them supervised or under the tutelage of mentors who are not family. So Don, those are the 2 things. Maybe you want to ask about that before I talk about the problems. Is that clear what I'm saying, what families ought to do to avoid these problems?
No, yeah, you ought to do that. We say we ought to not to smoke, but we smoke. But
Well, and Don, the reason I wanted to emphasize that is every family that I've met with, I've worked with hundreds, as I said earlier, every family I've met said, yeah, that's a nice idea for those other families, but we want to hire our nephew. I'm saying don't do it. That one of the largest, most successful families in Quebec, the province of Quebec in Canada, Paul Desmarais, they're multi-generational, very successful family. I said to Paul, what is your desire for your kids? And I'll never forget, he's allowed me to quote him. He said, we desire our kids to go elsewhere and become so successful elsewhere that we'll beg them to return. And so I encourage next gens to get as far away from the family company as they possibly can for as long as they can. That will make a difference. But to your question, not avoiding your question, what do you do when you have that nephew in the business? Couple things. The best gift that I was ever given was a performance evaluation that was hard hitting and honest. What we often do for family members working in the business, we don't give them any feedback. We don't tell them when they're screwing up or when they're failing with it. And so the number one thing that Mr. Myers did for me, he was actually president of our family company before I became president. I had 11 vice presidents working for me. He went to all 11 vice presidents twice a year and say, what's David done wrong lately? And he'd bring the list and dump it on my desk and say, okay, we got to address these things. So I think one of the most important things we need to do for family members who are in the business is get used to giving them hard hitting, genuine, honest feedback. And then the next thing we need to do is if they are not prepared to play ball, we need to give them a recess. And that could be a paid holiday for a month or for a year or whatever it is. We need to let them cool off and decide whether they really want to be there. And I want to borrow from Phil Jackson, the famous coach of both the Bulls and the Lakers. He was paid a lot of money, had a lot of success. But every year, even after he'd won 11 world championships, he stood on the baseline underneath the basketball hoop and had all of the players, I should say, stand on the baseline. And he'd say, gentlemen, I have been invited to coach your team. If you're prepared to accept me as your coach, step across the line. If you don't want to step across the line, we'll find you work elsewhere. And he submitted himself to the possibility that others might not want to follow. Mm-hmm. He also required everybody to step across the line. I think if a nephew's working in the company and doesn't want to do what is required, we need to give him a recess and then say, do you want to step across the line and join or not? And if I had been given by my uncle a choice, do I want to follow his leadership or not? That would have been a pivotal moment because what I ended up doing was neither. I didn't want to follow him. And so I worked there and caused all kinds of headaches for himself and myself. And, it's easy for me to say, looking back, he could have been different. I've written Dear Younger Me because I could have been different. I could have been more empathetic. He had to wait 40 years to become president. I wanted to become president in 10. If I'd had just a tiny bit of empathy, I might have taken a different approach.
Okay. Well, now let's talk about your topic. But first, tell us your website again so people know where they can reach you after this.
Yeah, thank you very much, Don. You're kind. nextstepadvisors.ca. Be happy to hear from you. Happy to get your questions, folks. So nextstepadvisors.ca. So what do you want me to talk about? Do you want to talk a little bit about this emotional intelligence thing further?
That's why you're on the program. That's what you want to talk about. I have my say.
Don, I definitely do. So let's talk about Benjamin Franklin. I was listening to his biography a number of years ago, autobiography, I should say, and he said something that rocked my world. Benjamin Franklin said, I decided to deny myself the privilege of ever disagreeing with anyone. Here's a guy, one of the founders of the Confederation, one of the founding fathers, helped write the Constitution, and he founded the post office. He was a scientist, brilliant man. He achieved a lot, but he said, I decided to deny myself the privilege of ever disagreeing with anyone. Let's just think about that. If you're in a family enterprise, if you're in a small business, you're working with your dad or your mom or your uncle or your aunt or your brother, frankly, and if you could take the same pledge that Benjamin Franklin made to deny himself the privilege of disagreeing with anyone, that would make a remarkable difference in all of your business and family relationships. So he's become a hero of mine, and I want to learn, and I want to help my clients, successors in family businesses to learn how can we adopt Benjamin Franklin's approach and become more able to be humble in our interactions with others in our family businesses. The other person I want to talk to you about, another hero of mine, is Walt Disney. I was born in 1955, and Disneyland in California was opened in 55. So me and Walt go way back to the very beginning. But Walt Disney was an amazing guy, not just as a cartoonist and as a filmmaker, but he was an amazing guy as a leader. And I want us to learn from him what critical thinking looks like. You see, Walt Disney was the kind of guy who would ask penetrating questions. Most of you would be familiar with the Pirates of the Caribbean. When Walt Disney went to the Pirates of the Caribbean, they're about to open it. They'd worked really hard, and he said, something's missing, folks. He had all of his team around him, senior and junior folks. And he said, it smells right, and it feels right, and it looks right, it sounds right, but there's something missing. What's missing? And room went silent. No one wanted to speak up. And finally, one of the janitors spoke up. He said, Mr. Disney, he said, I grew up in the South. There ought to be lightning bugs on a night like this in the Pirates of the Caribbean. And so they flew in real live lightning bugs for a while, and then they figured out how to make robotic lightning bugs. But Walt Disney, you notice he wasn't criticizing his team. He was asking, let's be critical of what we've done. And I think that the wisest successors in family businesses learn to be critical of ideas, not critical of people. I was critical of my uncle. I developed a critical spirit rather than critical thinking. And so often family businesses get into difficulty because people are criticizing each other. And I think we should become hard on ideas like Disney was, but soft on people. So there's a couple thoughts, Don, in terms of two of the things that I'm passionate about: humility and critical thinking, and Benjamin Franklin and Disney as mentors, virtual mentors for me.
But let me ask you this question. The biggest one in America, we've found from our surveys that many children don't want to go into the family business.
Yes.
They see their parents going 24/7 rather than
Yes.
And also, it's interesting. More daughters want to go into the business than
Yes.
sons lately,
Yes.
based on our surveys. I don't know
Yes.
if you've seen the same thing.
Yes. Yeah.
But how do you go about choosing your successor if you have more than one child?
Great. Well, so first of all, just to talk about why people don't want to work in the family business, why they should, and then how do we choose successors, Don? So how do we talk to our kids? I actually think we should encourage members of the next generation to discover their strengths, discover their passions, and encourage them to pursue those. So I don't think we should try and hoodwink or twist arms to get people to come to work in the family business. Michael Jordan, I'm a basketball fan, as you can probably guess. Michael Jordan was asked, how do you help people to become superstars? How do you help people to become excellent basketball players? And he said, make practice fun. If people are having fun, they're going to work hard. If you have as we had a construction business, if you're not interested in construction, you're not likely to be good at it. If you're not interested in the recycling business, you're not likely to be good at it. And so the first thing we need to do is not try and convince kids to join us if they don't want to. So I think it's actually a healthy thing. If a lot of kids don't want to join the family business, we shouldn't encourage them to do so. So I think that's, but your question was, what do we do? Remind me where you wanted to go with that.
Well, there's two parts. One is, what do you do if they don't want to join, and what do you do if you have a choice of sibling, a choice?
If a choice between people, yeah. So if they don't want to work in the business, I think that's a wonderful thing. That doesn't mean you need to disinherit them. If mom and dad have built a business, they might wish to leave the ownership of the business to the next generation. And lots of families that I work with now, Dawn, are helping their kids not to become managers or leaders in the business, but rather to learn to become owners. So one option, if the kids don't want to work in the business, is to help them to learn to become competent owners. And I think that makes a huge difference, don't you think?
Hadn't thought of that. That's pretty good. But now, what do? You have a son and you have a daughter.
Yeah. So I had the very first client I ever worked with in the Pacific Northwest was a gentleman whose father worked for their business, started it, frankly, it was in the fishing industry, fish processing, and he only had one son, and so his son, who was my client, was the only member of the family working in the business. And this gentleman called me. He was 63, and he said, I've got 3 boys, they all work in the business. My wife has told me to sell the company because if I choose one of my 3 boys and I don't choose either of the other 2, I'll split the family. And my wife has said, sell the business. She said, I don't want to do that. What do I do? And so I'm very pleased that I had the privilege of working with this gentleman, entrepreneurial leader. And what we did was we did 3 things, Don, and it made a magical difference. The first thing we did was we had the senior management team agree on their strategy. Where were they going with the business? And then based on that strategy, we recruited 3 independent non-family board members who could help the company move in that direction of their strategy. And then we said to those 3, we want you to choose, the independents, we want you to choose who you believe should be the next leader of the company. So of the 3 boys, only 2 decided to apply. So that made, we got half the problem was solved. 1 didn't apply for the job. And then the other 2 applied, and the independent non-family members, the board of directors, they selected and helped the family to choose the right one to be the leader of the company. And then they assisted that new leader to find a role for the other brother who was in the business. So, Don, I think the key is to have independent non-family directors and give them the responsibility to make that choice, because goodness knows my dad couldn't be objective about me. I have 4 children. I love them to death. Could I be objective about assessing whether they were capable of leading? Not in your life. I couldn't be objective. Could I play a role? Yes, but I would be willing to trust that to independent. I think that's the number one thing, Don.
But let me stop a minute and let's talk about the 2 brothers for 1
Yes.
minute,
Yes.
because again, coming up in our focus groups,
Yes.
can one brother ever accept the secondary role?
Well, I believe that the younger brother or older brother can learn to accept the secondary role if they believe 2 things. One is that the choice was made objectively by people that they respect. And secondly, if they're given a meaningful role in their own right. But, one thing that the other option that does exist, what percentage of companies family-owned companies in North America do you think, actually it's a US-based study, what percentage of family companies in the United States of America today have co-CEOs?
I have no idea.
It's 13%. Don, that's a remarkable number to me, because it's a rare thing. It's not 50%. It's only 13, but it's more than 10%. It's a meaningful number. 13% of family companies have decided that they're going to have co-CEOs. It can work. So that's another option. And I've had the privilege of talking to a number of different families, both who are doing that and who are exploring that. That is an option. Blew my mind when I discovered so many are doing it.
I'm surprised. So we learned so. Like I love this program because I learn something new every time. But again, it takes an awful lot. If you look at The Godfather, the movie,
Yes,
I mean,
yes,
I mean, would Michael have been the head of the family if Sonny had not been killed? And
yeah.
what would have happened? But anyway, well, we have just a few minutes left, so I'm gonna say, what would you like to leave our audience with? But before you do, give your website one last
Well,
time.
Don, you're very kind. So my website is Next Step Advisors, spelled with an O, nextstepadvisors.ca, and I'd love to hear from you. And thank you very much for that, Don. One of the things I would like to leave, I'd like to leave a couple things, but the one thing I'd like to leave our listeners is the idea that family enterprise is better than non-family enterprise. Now that may sound like an outlandish statement, but I'm actually quoting, or in a moment I'd like to quote Dr. John Davis, who for 25 years taught at the Harvard Business School and now he teaches at MIT. John Davis, doing research, Don, you do focus groups research. If you look at the data, at the 30th anniversary of the Family Firm Institute, Dr. Davis said family firms outperform non-family firms, meaning financially they get a better return for their shareholders. Family firms outperform non-family firms. And number two, he said, then they outlast non-family firms. The data is in it. Family company lasts twice as long on average to non-family. So the first thing I want to suggest to our listeners is, if you're a family business, be proud of it. Family businesses across the globe are better. They're the economic backbone of the world. So we don't need to be afraid of being family business. We don't need to be shy about it. Family businesses are better and they last longer and they provide a better financial result for their shareholders. So I want to emphasize that. The second thing is, if you are a member of a family enterprise, yes, it's important for you to learn about the business, but all the family companies around the world that run into trouble trip over two things, one of two things. They trip over interrelationship problems or the next generation not being prepared well enough. And so if you're a member of the next generation, I want to encourage you to get education. I want to encourage you to work outside your family company, maybe as many as 5 or 10 years, so that you can develop skills that you can bring back to the family company, so that you can be a genuine contributor rather than just riding on mom and dad's coattails. And the other thing I want to suggest, if you're a successor in a family business, make your emphasis on building quality relationships. Develop your emotional intelligence so you can do that. And Don, if I sound like a preacher trying to tell people what they should do, it's because I forfeited my opportunity. I worked for a family company that was voted one of the 100 best companies to work for in Canada. The company that now carries our family's name is all across Europe and in the United States, Bentall Green Oak. There's billions of assets under administration with this family company that none of our family worked there, and we own nothing. I forfeited my opportunity because I didn't take the time to cultivate emotional intelligence for me. And so I plead those of you who are listening, don't do what David did. I wrote a book called Dear Younger Me. If I could listen to me, I'd say, cultivate humility like Benjamin Franklin, cultivate your critical thinking skills like Disney, and learn to have better relationships. It'll make a huge difference for your family and your relationships. Don, you're smiling. What do you want to say?
No, wonderful way to end the show. Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more.
Don, thank you so much for having me. It's my privilege.